Okay, think about this for a second. You are completely different today than you were 10 years ago, right? I mean, your cells have literally regenerated, your thoughts have shifted, your beliefs have evolved. You are quite literally not the same person. So here's a seriously mind-bending philosophical paradox for you. If everything in the universe, including you, is constantly changing and impermanent, who actually inherits the consequences of your past actions? If the you who made a mistake yesterday doesn't even exist today, why should the you of today face the consequences?
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to untangle that exact paradox by unpacking a really profound classical Buddhist text, the Upasaka Sila Sutra. And look, don't just think of this as some dusty religious doctrine. It's actually a deeply psychological and philosophical roadmap. It gives us this incredibly clear, step-by-step path to ancient wisdom, and it was designed specifically for everyday people who are just trying to navigate a chaotic world.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll look at the 6 perfections, explore the art of true giving, discuss overcoming inner obstacles, break down the mechanics of karma, and finally, we'll wrap up with analogies of continuity.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, the 6 perfections, which is basically our ultimate map. The sutra lays out these 6 foundational practices: giving, precepts, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom. Now, what's really fascinating here is that it emphasizes you can't just treat these like an a la carte menu of good deeds. You can't just pick one and ignore the rest. They're this interconnected, holistic system designed for, well, taming the human mind. Wisdom is the root cause, sure, but giving is the visible fruit. They all build perfectly on one another.
Let's zoom in on that very first perfection on the list, giving, or dana. The Buddha deliberately taught this one first. Why? Because as humans, we're kind of hardwired for self-preservation and greed. We naturally want to hoard our resources. By actively practicing the act of offering freely without secretly hoping for a reward or, a tax write-off, we actually strike at the very root of our deep-seated selfishness. It's that absolutely crucial first step to loosening the grip on our own egos.
But honestly, this is where the text gets super relatable. The sutra draws this sharp contrast between monks and lay people, everyday folks with jobs, mortgages, and families, and it shows this surprising empathy. It explicitly says that walking this path is way harder for the layperson. Monastics just have fewer worldly ties, so purifying these perfections is a bit easier for them. But for a layperson, constantly tangled up in the chaos of daily life, mastering this takes immense grit. So if you find being a good person exhausting sometimes, hey, this ancient text totally validates exactly how you feel.
Moving right along to section 2, the art of true giving and how it goes way beyond just wealth.
So the text breaks givers down into a few distinct categories. Take a look at this and maybe ask yourself, which category do you naturally fall into when someone asks for help? The lower giver is just driven by fear of losing their stuff. They get angry or just ignore the person entirely. The middle giver believes in cause and effect. They know they should give, but they still cling to their wealth and kind of do it with a heavy heart of regret. But that upper giver, they deeply get that wealth is impermanent. They don't even wait to be asked. They give joyfully and proactively. They don't see it as losing money. They see it as planting seeds.
Now, what exactly are we supposed to be giving out? The sutra breaks giving down into 3 forms. And notice here that wealth, material goods, is only a third of the equation. Offering someone fearlessness, which means providing comfort, protecting them from harm, or just giving them peace of mind in a pretty terrifying world, is a massive act of charity. And the same goes for giving dharma, meaning teaching truth and sharing wisdom. You really don't need a massive bank account to be incredibly generous.
To really drive this home, the sutra drops this beautifully specific detail. Even sharing a tiny, dust-like pinch of flour with an ant creates boundless merit. How amazing is that? The whole point is that true generosity is measured entirely by the purity of your intention, not the size of your wallet. If you have almost nothing, but you gladly share a tiny crumb with an insect, you've engaged in the absolute highest form of giving.
All right, on to section 3, overcoming inner obstacles, or the 5 hurdles. The text lists out 5 timeless hurdles we have to smash through. Number 1, a heart of anger. 2, greed. 3, jealousy. 4, cherishing our own physical life way too much, which makes us overly defensive. And 5, simply disbelieving in the reality of cause and effect, or karma. It is wild how a text this ancient perfectly diagnoses our modern struggles, isn't it? When we fail to be generous, it's almost always because one of these 5 inner hurdles is tripping us up.
Beating these hurdles takes a ton of strength. The text actually says, the mind of a giver should not be moved by greed, just as Mount Samuru cannot be moved by the wind. Now, Mount Samuru is this colossal, mythical center of the universe in Buddhist cosmology. It's a brilliant image. It shows the massive, unshakable mental fortitude we need to cultivate. When greed or jealousy blow against you like a hurricane, your intention to help others literally has to remain a mountain.
Which brings us to Section 4, the mechanics of karma, cause, effect, and the self.
Okay, so why is it so vital to tame those inner demons? To get that, we have to pivot to the real heavy philosophical engine of this text. How do the mechanics of our actions actually ripple into the future? First, we need to define a core Buddhist concept, the 5 skandhas, or aggregates. The sutra explains that what we call a person is actually just a temporary mashup of 5 constantly changing physical and mental components: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. You aren't a static, unchanging soul, you are a continuous, shifting process.
And boom, that brings us right back to the paradox we started with. The sutra actually stages this grand debate right in the text. An opponent steps up and argues, hey, if the 5 skandhas are impermanent, if the self who does a generous act today disappears and changes, who gets the reward tomorrow? Doesn't this mean one person acts and a totally different person receives the result? It is such a fantastic question. If the past self is literally extinguished, how on earth can it cause a future result?
Let's unpack that in our final section, Part 5, Analogies of Continuity, where we visualize the invisible.
The sutra's answer to this whole debate is a total masterclass. Instead of bogging us down in dense, abstract logic, it gives us these vivid visual analogies, starting with farming. Think about planting a seed. The seed germinates into a sprout, the sprout grows a stem, the stem blooms a flower, and that flower produces fruit. Now, by the time you're holding that fruit, the original seed is completely gone, extinguished. But would you ever say the fruit has nothing to do with the seed? Of course not. Even though the seed and the fruit are totally different things, that unbroken chain of cause and effect between them is undeniable.
It builds on this with a torch relay analogy. Imagine lighting a torch and carrying it for 100 miles. The flames flickering at the start are absolutely not the exact same physical flames burning at mile 100. The fire is constantly consuming itself and changing every millisecond. Yet if someone asked you at the end of the journey where the fire came from, you'd point right back to the start. The flame at mile 100 isn't the same flame, but it's bound by an unbroken sequence.
Then the sutra takes a slightly harsher turn to make a really emphatic point about responsibility. Picture a guy who carelessly drops a spark in some dry grass. The spark burns out super fast, but it ignites the grass, which catches the brush, and eventually it burns down a whole village 200 miles away. When they confront the guy, he argues, "Hey, I didn't burn the village. The spark I dropped burned out miles ago." The sutra points out that any judge would call him a fool. You can't just escape responsibility for the chain reaction you start, simply because your original action is in the past.
The text applies this exact same logic to things transforming over time. Milk turns into curds, curds become butter, and butter becomes ghee. The ghee is completely different from the milk, but it emerges in a continuous sequence from it. If you put poison in the milk, the ghee is going to be poisonous. If the milk is pure, the ghee is nourishing. The changing of states doesn't break the chain of consequence. The you of tomorrow is basically the ghee to the you of today's milk.
And that brings us to the profound peak of this explainer. The sutra summarizes this entire philosophy using the metaphor of the Ganges River. The water in the river is literally never the same from one second to the next. It swells up in the summer, shrinks down in the autumn, the banks shift, the current changes. Yet despite all this chaotic impermanence, people look at it and always call it the river. Your life, your identity, your karma, they're exactly like this. The contents of your mind and body are constantly flowing and changing, but the river of your karma just flows on continuously.
So here's your ultimate takeaway from all this. You are not a static object. You're a continuous process. Every act of generosity, every little moment of patience, every flash of anger, it's all a drop of water entering your stream, or a seed being planted on your riverbank. The person who inherits the fruit of your actions tomorrow won't be exactly who you are today, but they will absolutely be born from the chain reaction you're starting right now. Knowing that every single action shapes this continuous flow, I gotta ask, what kind of seeds are you planting in your river today?